Hello and welcome back to the AJ100 Festival. I'm Emily Booth, I edit the Architects Journal, and I'd like to welcome you to the final day of the festival. We hope that you have enjoyed the festival programme so far and our new virtual format. Before we begin with the final awards announcements, I'd once again like to thank our judges for their time and effort in deliberating and debating this year's entrants. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for supporting the AJ100 Festival and the AJ100 programme. Our thanks to our headline sponsor, Rocker. Our programme sponsors, Schluter Systems and Siemens. Our festival sponsors, Equitone, Moser and VM Zinc. And our trophy sponsor, Fixie. We'd love it if you could tweet or post to Instagram your virtual celebrations. Don't forget to tag the Architects Journal using the AJ100 Festival hashtag. Thank you and congratulations once again to all of this year's AJ100 winners, and I hope you enjoy today's programme.
And now, please welcome our final Disruptor practice of the week.
Built by Us is a social enterprise, and our mission is to diversify the construction sector. We're really thinking about how we can build a much more inclusive built environment, and that's both the practitioners that are working in the environment, but also about the outcomes. You know, if we have a wider talent pool working in construction, in design, the potential for having really exciting, innovative and inclusive outcomes, I think, are even greater. I think that as a sector, we tend to focus on process far more than people. And we've got into some habits which mean that we tend to think that our talent pool is narrower than it actually is. So we don't necessarily share the story and the power and the amazing things that we do with the widest talent pool. So there is an issue in terms of attracting the widest talent pool. We're seeing in medicine and in law and in tech a greater interest in making sure that they can almost future-proof those sectors by being as diverse as possible. For construction, that has not always been the case. And while there are improvements, it needs to get a lot better. In architecture, what we're beginning to see is change through our schools, and particularly in terms of emerging talent. People are just kind of coming in. However, we have a real issue with retention. We need to retain and develop that talent. I would love to see more diverse managers and leaders for our sector. And that's partly because they act as role models for the next generation coming up. People want to be what they can see. And if they can see a really diverse cohort of leaders, it'll encourage people to, continue their careers. That would be a huge change to see much more development of diverse talent in terms of management and leadership. Engagement at school is incredibly important, and actually I'd go earlier, I'd go primary, because actually having worked with schools myself, the sort of gentrification of work happens quite early. I can remember working on a primary school myself and being on site, and these little 6 and 7-year-old kids saw me in a hard hat, and they were a little bit flummoxed. They were like, "Mr. Lady Builder, what are you doing?" But in a way I kind of thought, oh, they're already associating that particular world with being a particular person. So if young people are deciding or hearing the message very, very early on that this is not a career for them, then the chances are that by the time they get to secondary school, that will be even more set. So definitely work with secondary schools, but primary schools need that inspiration too. Primary school children need that inspiration too. I'm pretty optimistic about the future of architecture and its diversity. I think we are seeing the sort of seeds of change in the generation coming through. So when we look at our architecture schools and those just starting in practice, we're seeing a much more diverse talent pool. We've got some great tools as well to help that diversity, like architectural apprenticeships. So I think the tools are there, and for some sections of the profession, the demand to create and foster change is there. I would say diversity is the disruption that we need for the sector to kind of challenge the ways that we think, and also to ensure that we're reflecting the society that we serve.
Our final award is Contribution to the Profession. The 2020 AJ100 Contribution to the Profession Award has been awarded to Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara, founders of the internationally acclaimed Grafton Architects. AJ100 Practices voted overwhelmingly to give the award to the duo, who have built up an impressive international portfolio of work since setting up their practice in Dublin more than 40 years ago. Renowned for its humanity and generosity, their work includes the University of Limerick Medical School, the mixed-use townhouse for Kingston University, and the ongoing Marshall Building for the London School of Economics. We are delighted to celebrate their invaluable contribution to the profession as practitioners, teachers, and role models, and are thrilled to invite them to accept the award today.
Hello, my name is Yvonne Farrell, and on behalf of Shelley McNamara and myself, we'd just like to say we are extremely honoured to receive the Contribution to the Profession Award. It is a great surprise, a great honour, and we'd just like to thank all those involved in this award. Just like to wish the AJ100 Festival all the very best indeed. And we'd just like to say that it is a privilege to be trained as an architect for every one of us. It's also that society relies on us as a profession to transform needs into something more. And also from our point of view in Grafton Architects, all our colleagues involved here too, that we know that architecture spans an unusual range of responsibilities, from art to business, and that makes it a difficult profession because it has a cultural dimension that needs to be retained and emphasized, and also has to survive within the norms of economics. So we'd just like to say how much we really appreciate this award. It's wonderful for both Shelley and I, and also for all the people in our practice, and to wish everyone all the very best in these strange and unusual times, and to say thank you again. This is a fantastic piece of news. The award is a wonderful thing to receive, and thank you to everyone involved from Shelley McNamara and myself. Thank you. Goodbye.
And now, our Contribution to the Profession 2020 winners, Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara of Grafton Architects, will share a lecture on architecture as an ancient art and how, through their projects, they aim to evolve and transform it.
My name is Yvonne Farrell from Grafton Architects in Dublin. Architecture is an ancient art which needs each of us to continue and transform it. Being an architect means that we add to the crust of this fragile planet. We need to add beauty and be efficient with the resources that we specify. Materials enclose spaces, shelter our physical and psychological selves. Material, and all materials from the earth, they form our palette from which we choose carefully. The images that I have here in front of me this afternoon is, on the left-hand side, is a 2,000-year-old gold boat called the Brucher boat. It's a model of a boat which would be about 15 meters long. And what's really beautiful about it is that it has twin oars, about 9 on either side, and benches and a rudder and a mast. And the reason for putting it up here this afternoon to share with you is that it is about craft, it's about a model, it's about a beautiful material of gold. These series of kind of postcards, this one here is really one of a photograph I took in the Doge's Palace in Venice. And what really surprised me was that there were 2 types of light, a white light and a yellow light, and I couldn't understand what it was. And this was really the natural phenomenon of the kind of daylight factor, which is the sky, and then the sunlight. And what was really beautiful was that the highly polished terrazzo floor was making this phenomenon clear. On the right-hand side is an image that we really, really love. This is the entrance to a beautiful house by Jorn Utzon, the Danish architect. And what is really wonderful about Utzon's work is that he takes the inert material of concrete, and by thinking about the human body and draping the concrete or applying tiles to it, he has made a seat which is slightly sloped to take your seated position, and two pieces on the wall which take and hold your back. So it's really about architecture having the ability to cradle and hold the individual, and that it takes architectural design skill and thinking to achieve that. The image down below here is from Lima in Peru. And the wonderful thing about being an architect and projects that we've had the good fortune to build, it brought us to Peru. And these are, if you like, areas in Lima, and they're called huacas, and they're made up. What's really interesting is that these are sun-dried bricks, and they're stacked like books to make these plateaus and plazas, which people starting from about 10,000 years ago, who were nomadic fishermen and farmers, they made these places of administration and of gathering, and had kind of religious significance and gathering significant. And for us, these places were amazing. This man-made by the humble brick, making something which was monumental, and also had a certain gentleness to it. Beside it is the magnificent stone carvings in Machu Picchu, high up in the Andes Mountains. And for us, what was and is amazing about the Inca achievement is that they transform solid rock into what looks like cushions. And what is also amazing is that not only is each face of the cubes of stone modified to have a no mortar, you can't get a knife into the joint, but also that there are these little sockets, earthquake devices to hold the buildings together. So this is really a kind of a postcard of some of the kind of beautiful things that surround us in terms of material choices, influences, and history, and the fact that we're part of as architects, we're part of an amazing tradition. The next image, here we are, is a series of 9 images of projects that they're describing work that we did in Grafton Architects. Starting on the left-hand side, they're all rough, they're all to the same scale, and this is housing embedded in the heart of Dublin, a complex project from Merrion Square to Denzil Lane, which was a complex project as well, civic offices in Dunshaughlin, the Urban Institute in University College Dublin, a building in Trinity College where we saved a kind of a beautiful lime tree and in terms of expansion. 2 schools which were built at the same time in North Kildare, on the flat ground of North Kildare, surrounded by it was the first integrated primary school with children with autism, and it was really a wonderful experience for us to work with the Department of Education and also the people who ran that school. Then Art School Wirra, which was a project on a gentle hill in East Galway, so we retained the actual feeling of the hill itself with ramped circulation. And the Solstice Art Centre here was also embedding into landscape. So we're carving into the slope of a hill in the centre of the town of Navan in Dublin, making a theatre for 320 people. And the building at the end, to the same scale, just a little bit bigger than the secondary school here, was a competition that we did in 2002 for University Luigi Bocconi in Milan. And this was an architectural competition which we won and built in the fantastic city in northern Italy. And moving into on bringing the story of light. This is from the interior of the Aula Magna. If you can imagine, I'll go over here, that this was a competition for 1,000 offices and for professors and administrators. And it was also a project that needed a large hall for 1,000 people, as well as 5 other large seminar rooms. So for us, finding a strategy that would make a world that also allowed the light of the sky and the sense of carving into the earth. This diagram is really describing the ambition of the project, that the world of the offices became like an abacus or a courtyard system raised to the sky, that the light was brought down between these courtyards, and that the elements that were held within the ground caused a kind of eruption. And this paper model is really our early studies of movement going from level 0 down to -5 and -9. And the study model is really a way of describing a thought process about how to give scale for some. This is about 180 meters long by about 80 here. And we positioned the Aula Magna on the junction between the busy road and the quieter road. We organized a series of small courtyards through which light penetrates below, and positioning the big hall on the junction between the busy road, the quieter road, as the connection between the university and the city itself. So this architectural drawing is really describing that person there is on street level. So you have an 8-meter high glass screen. You're looking down below to -5 to -9 with parking down below. And the aula then has 3 periscopes of light, which is shown in the image above. So this is really these light scoops that bring light into this internal room, but daylight is brought in. And these are the courtyards with the offices above. And for us, each project is about an experiment, and sometimes things happen with more architectural force than we had imagined. And this is the 22-meter cantilever. And when you're standing 5 meters below with the clear glass window to the city, 2 things happen which are really very beautiful from our point of view. One is that you feel the sense of the weight of the aula above you, but also there's a relationship between city and people of the university, and the people of the university and the city. And in terms of material, on the concrete structure is a beautiful stone called ceppo, which is what we would describe as geological concrete that we have used as the main cloaking material of the building. And then as we go 5 meters below, what we've used is a beautiful white stone called Bianca Laza, and that allows light to drive itself down 5 meters and 9 meters, and it's been described like an oyster shell in the interior. Another competition that we did on the other side of the earth in Peru was for a new university, for UTEC, which is an engineering university, and they had a new campus on a very particular site in the city of Lima. And doing competitions in other places allows us as architects to if you like, begin to understand the culture of different places. And Lima is a desert city, 12 degrees down from the equator, and should, by all intents and purposes, be a very hot place. But because it's beside the Pacific Ocean, and because of a current which comes up from Antarctica called the von Humboldt current, the cold current and the warm air mix to keep this city in a temperature roughly about in the 20 degrees Celsius. And when we were doing research, on the left-hand side is the image of the fog on these 40-meter high cliffs between the Pacific and the city. But we also did research into von Humboldt himself. This is an incredible drawing by von Humboldt called Naturgemälde. And what's really wonderful about this in these times of environmental consciousness, really, that here was this amazing man who did this drawing, putting together all the data, the scientific data of plants and atmospheric pressure and geographical position, and he made it into a synthesized drawing. So this is the first kind of environmental synthesis drawing we find absolutely enthralling as an image. And the two images below are something that we came across when we were presenting UTEC in the 2012 Common Ground exhibition that David Chipperfield had organized for the Venice Biennale, with a wonderful theme. On the left-hand side is Machu Picchu, and on the right-hand side is Shelley off the coast of Ireland. And what's extraordinary is the similarity between these two images, both with dry stone wall structures, but also these tiny and intimate gardens within both structures, clinging onto the section of the Andes and the rock in the Atlantic. So when we were doing this competition, it was also an opportunity to think about the wonderful work of architects in South America that we had been looking at for years, and also trying to understand the impact of their work. Here is a fantastic project by Mendes de Rocha, and what interests us about that image is that it's not just the fact that it's an amazing soccer structure, to watch the game of soccer off the image, but it's also a place for people to socialize. So in the section underneath the structure is where people meet and where people gather together. And so for us, understanding this competition, realizing the site had the impact of the motorway on one side and a very gentle residential on another, we took the brief and analyzed it, placing the larger rooms on the lower level, the big laboratories, the smaller laboratories, the library as you move up the building, and use the terraces as gardens. So in the same way as Machu Picchu has these tiny intimate gardens, that the students would have these terrace gardens facing away from the motorway that they could enjoy. So here is a paper model of the cascading interior of or side of the building. Here's the interior of the building, if you like, which is a series of the question we asked ourselves when we were doing a university in a place like this: could it be an arena for learning? What could we keep external that could possibly remain external, and what needed to be internal by virtue of its own needs? So we separated out what we could, and all the circulation is external. And what's amazing about this kind of esheric movement through the building is that you have ways for students to move externally. We've woven in gardens into this work. And also then that they are looking into the laboratories as they go along. So educationally, we were trying to connect education and movement and landscape and place. So this section on the right-hand side shows the lower part of the building embedded into the earth. And because it's an earthquake zone, those red guys along there, you can see them, these are seismic isolators, and they're about 1.5 meter in diameter, and they're like springs on which the rest of the building sits. So you have this peaked, they're like a peak cap protecting you from the sun. You have all the circulation external. My last slide now, before Shelley continues this lecture, is really describing something that we want to emphasize in these particular days. We were delighted to be invited to be the curators of the 2018 Venice Architectural Biennale. And we had a theme of free space. But within that, we also had sub-themes. And one of them was the earth as client. And what we meant by that was that all of us as architects are responding to clients. We are commissioned to do work by clients, some who are unbelievably generous, some probably less so on the scale of things, but in the end, the earth is our client, and sustainability is not just a kind of an equation, it's a kind of a moral responsibility, or hopefully a way that makes us think in a certain way. So we, in the Biennale, had two particular things. It's just interesting. On the left-hand side, you can watch these on video. There's a little video called El Capo. And what is amazing about this video is that it's watching the mining of Carrara marble. And when we specify as architects, we're really taking from the earth the if you like, the elements or the results of huge geological forces. So this is really to remind us that when we want a piece of 40 millimeter marble, it actually is taken from somewhere else. And below that is another film that you can watch on YouTube at your leisure. It's called Chasing Ice. And what is extraordinary about this film by James Balog is that it's really watching the disintegration of the polar ice caps. And it really is sobering. It's just by chance that these two images of marble and ice are both white, but that as they disintegrate and that we're all part of that. And I suppose the sadness of the coronavirus is that it does really remind us that we're all part of the world, that we're all interconnected, and that what happens to the ice in the various polar caps does affect us. And that's why beside that image, and in the Biennale, we positioned Dortra Mandruff's work and Marina Tabison's work together. And Dortra Mandruff's beautiful building in Greenland, she talks very passionately about the fact that the permafrost is melting. So what was foundation before is now softening. And above, Marina Tabison, absolutely beautiful homestead from Bangladesh. Bangladesh is one of the lowest countries in the world with one of the highest populations. So the relationship between Chasing Ice, between Greenland and Bangladesh and the Earth as client affects us all. And as architects, it is something that we need to speak about. And sustainability is not just a kind of a legal requirement in the future, it's a human requirement. So just as I finish, one of the things here on the right-hand side is Shelley and I are involved at the Accademia di Architettura in Mendrisio, and last year we set a project with our students in the Venetian lagoon, and this beautiful drawing describes it's like a kind of a human tissue. These are the dark entrances in from the sea. There are three of them into the lagoon where the sweet water from the mountains and the salt water from the sea mixes. And while we were doing that project with the students, on the right hand side, the middle image here, which is a standard door, this is really the Aqua Alta happened when we were doing the project. And if you like, the standard height of high water is the first blue line. And then you get the maximum, which was in 1996, I think. And then what happened last year was here. So we're really dealing with, if you like, the impact of flooding. And on the right-hand side is a beautiful project by one of our students. And it's really placed there in terms of dealing with other generations as they come forward to think about sustainability in real terms. And for us, recently, we won a very interesting competition in Fayetteville in Arkansas in the United States, where Dean McKeith ran a project for a new timber building. And what's really interesting for us in the new Anthony Timberland Center is that it is an all timber building where really we are looking at timber with all its characteristics, so that we look at it in terms of sustainability and in the quality of architecture that can come out of architects looking deeply into the characteristics and possibilities of timber. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Shelley McNamara from Grafton Architects in Dublin. Following on from Yvonne's presentation, one of the things Yvonne spoke about was Venice and our curation of the Biennale. And the theme that we set was free space. And we recently discovered this image, which we love. We call it a wall of fragments, but it was made by the architect and archaeologist Luigi Canina in 1848. And he was the architect who excavated the Appian Way. And he found these fragments in this work and built this beautiful brick wall with the fragments of stone in some way, I suppose, to represent what was left of the buildings that lined the Appian Way. And anybody who has visited the Appian Way will find it extraordinarily powerful that you have an old road with the old surface, with much of the edges gone, some brick walls and some doorbells, which was also extraordinary, I found, on the Appian Way. And the power of this fragment of a road is really an extraordinary and surprising spatial experience. But the way we were thinking about this in relation to Venice was that one of the themes we used was the free space of time and memory, and our role or our work as architects being to reach into the past and to somehow also move to the future. And we really love the phrase by Carl Jung when he says the unconscious psyche is not only immensely old, it is also capable of growing into an equally remote future. So as architects, we're continually reaching to the past and trying to look to the future, and we're continually working with fragments, because this is the nature of memory, let's say, and memory and time in architecture is not linear. And what we find ourselves doing when we're making work is thinking about experiences and sensations which we have had, and trying to find an atmosphere of the new space that we're going to make. And it's a kind of cacophony of sensations which we try to give a structure to. And the pianist Glenn Gould, in speaking about the work of Beethoven, describes something which we continually feel, and which Glenn Gould talks about, the struggle between the inventor and the curator. And as architects, we're minders of history, but we're also evolving and moving. And what Glenn Gould says about Beethoven's music, which personally I find very comforting and inspirational, where he says that this very struggle becomes the surface of Beethoven's music. I also love the fact that he uses the term surface, the surface of the music, because this is so much to do with the struggle of our everyday work, is how do we make a surface which has a quality, and that this wall of fragments has this amazing rich surface and this rich texture of experience. And the next image describes, we also spoke about light and the nature's free gifts. This is in the Venice Manifesto. And a friend of ours, a poet, said to us one day, we were discussing the difference between writing and poetry and architecture, and he said, but your material is light, isn't it? That's what you work with. And we found that, again, quite a challenge. Sometimes our lives are very complex, and when a poet says to you, your material is light, it reminds you that your material is light. And it was the year before we did the Bocconi competition, we had our first ever office trip to the north of Spain. We went to San Sebastian actually to see the new building of Rafael Moneo and to see the city. But we also visited the studios and the workshop and the exhibition spaces of Chillida, which is not far from San Sebastian. And we had known the work on the right, which is carving into a mountain, and it's about that thing of control and working with light. And there was something we found in Bocconi, the thing of making space below ground. and the intense light of Milan, how it draws the light deep down into these spaces, which were 9 meters below ground. But the image on the left we also found intriguing, because these little pieces of sculpture, sometimes little, sometimes big, seemed to capture the light inside. And this is something we've really started to think about in making buildings. How can you make a building which feels quite solid and has a sense of mass, and at the same time seems to somehow capture and hold the light? This is something we thought about a lot when we were doing the competition for the London School of Economics, because that faces north, and we tried to see how the tissue of the building could capture the south light so that it would feel like it was coming through to the north-facing street. And the next image is more about the abstraction of architecture. The top two drawings are both plans. The top left image is a plan of Kingston University, and the one beside it is a structural plan of the London School of Economics. And when one thinks about music and how musicians describe their notes and their quality and sound and pace of the music, what a wonderful language that is, to see it written and described in its abstraction. And we as architects work with this kind of shorthand. And it's interesting that the structure on the top left describes a kind of weave of very simple orthogonal spaces, and it looks to us like a textile, where you get the warp and the weft of the weave, and we were somehow thinking about the spaces in the same way. Whereas the drawing of the structure of the London School of Economics has a different sense altogether, and it's based on being a transfer structure at a very, let's say, direct way, where we're transferring from 20 meters bands to 15 meters bands to 10 meters bands to 7.5 meters band, and how this diagonal, orthogonal twisting and turning of structure is the transfer structure. And of course that becomes the space, which is the photograph on the right-hand side, wonderful on-site photograph taken by Dennis Gilbert, which describes this sense of this tree-like structure, which starts quite dense, and then, starts quite far apart in terms of spans of columns, and then becomes more dense as you move up through the building. And it just happened that in Kingston University, the reference for that was the drawings by Jorn Utzon for his furniture showroom in Copenhagen, and that also was a forest. But here the forest gets translated in Kingston into a kind of warehouse of ideas, as did the furniture showroom in Copenhagen by Utzon. So my point is that on the one hand, one is working with the very real, physical, sensual experience of space and the memory of space, and trying to project that into these diagrams to do with structure and ways of structuring space. And the next image describes the project, two images of our project in Toulouse. Again, a school of economics beside the Garonne River. A wonderful city, a brick city with bridges and cloisters and colonnades. And we were taking these fragments of Toulouse and trying to wrap them into a new construct, which would become this university. Yvonne spoke earlier about the climate and the earth as client, and we really pushed something we had discovered in Milan, which was the thing of making exterior spaces and how courtyards can trap sunlight, but can also deal with shade and with convection of hot and cold air to cool us down on those hot Milanese days. And here we push this even further by taking the main entrance foyer of Toulouse and making it into an entrance hall, which is protected from wind and rain, but is still outside. And it's framing and connecting with the city. And we love this sense of two students, the scale of the two students standing on a gallery, looking past our sky cloister and engaging with the city beyond. Again, this is something we're really conscious of in our projects, is that choreographing of the world outside and the connection of the world outside with the inner world of whichever project we're trying to make. And the final image that I'm going to show is the flying island of Laputa. We looked at this when we were doing a competition for the Dublin City Library. And the reason was because this library is overlooking Parnell Square, which originally was a pleasure garden. And we were trying to see how we could restart this regeneration of this part of Dublin, but also the regeneration of the pleasure garden, hopefully in the future. And we loved this image because it was a kind of flying utopian space. But it possibly also relates back to what Yvonne was talking about in terms of the Earth as client idea used again in the Venice Biennale. Because Dean Swift, writing Gulliver's Travels, made this island of Laputa where the inhabitants traveled using magnetic levitation. And in his story, the island had a cave which collected rainfall. And the inhabitants spent their time listening to the music of the spheres. And they believed in astrology and worried constantly about the sun going out. And we, in thinking about our role as architects, imagining worlds, we were reminded that if Jonathan Swift can imagine this floating utopia in 1786, what can we as architects imagine now in 2020, given that architecture translates imagined worlds into physical reality, which is what Alberti and Vitruvius were always doing, dealing with the free gifts, let's call them, of light and wind and air, but also thinking about how architecture makes worlds for human being. Alberti in the 15th century saw architecture as the infrastructure of civilized life. And this wonderful phenomenon called architecture, which is what we are all a part of, is by its nature optimistic because of this imaginative component, which, again, just quoting Jung, is as old as time and as young as what he calls an equally remote future. Thank you.
That concludes the week's awards announcements. Many congratulations to all our winners. Our subscribers should be receiving the AJ100 magazine from today. We hope you enjoy it. The AJ team are a supremely dedicated bunch and we worked hard on it. On behalf of the AJ Awards team, thank you for celebrating with us this week. Congratulations again to all our winners, and we hope to see you all in person next year.